To start the special meeting, would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox? Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson? Mayor Pressing?
Here. Are there any petitions or communications? Anyone who would like to address the City Council? I have one person, Esther Patt. Anyone else can fill out a little card at the back and give it to the clerk.
Good evening. Thanks for this opportunity to speak. I just wanted to share with you a few thoughts with regard to the property maintenance code. One is there seems to be some confusion on the part of some people, I don't know if any of them are watching tonight, about deadlines for code compliance, because we were talking about shorter deadlines. Some people seem to think the 30-day deadline is going away, and my understanding is that most violations would still get a 30-day deadline, and what you've done in the proposed property maintenance code update is expand a little bit the list of items that have a short time period for compliance when they are either emergencies or really easy things that could be fixed quickly. The other issue I wanted to speak to, which I've spoken to you about before, but I just want to say one more thing about, is fines. We too often see situations where the reason for delay on repairs is not because of parts on order or inability to get a contractor, but landlords delaying repairs simply because they don't bother to do the work right away. You know, a tenant moved into an apartment with a broken window, and she put plastic up. I mean, there was a hole in the glass. She put plastic up over it, reported it to her landlord, repeatedly, finally came to us after 6 weeks. She filed a complaint. I called the landlord. He said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, we've been busy. I'm going to call Cotter Glass and get it taken care of. And a week later, I called him, and this is like a Monty Python routine, and he said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, we've been real busy. I'm going to call Cotter Glass and get it taken care of. And I called him a week later. He said, I've been real busy. I'm going to call Cotter Glass and get it taken care of. And, you know, a little secret of the universe, Cotter Glass is not going to get your window fixed unless you call them. And so often that's the problem, is they just delay. Last fall, the tenant whose roof was leaking, it actually had been leaking since July. The roof leak was so bad that he had moved, it was in the bedroom, he'd moved out of the bedroom and was sleeping in the living room and keeping all his things there. He was concerned the ceiling would fall down. He brought me pictures, and most of the bedroom ceiling was this dark brown, water-stained. The landlord patched the ceiling, or the roof, we think, but it leaked again, patched it. I contacted the landlord, and he said he was going to patch it again. And I said, well, it seems like the patching isn't working. And he said, well, we put a new roof on 8 or 9 years ago, so re-roofing isn't appropriate now. We'll just keep patching until we get this taken care of. So I referred the tenant to the city. Inspector came out, cited the violation, gave the landlord 30 days. After 30 days, and this was just 2 months ago, after 30 days, it was not fixed. 12 days after the 30-day deadline, we had a heavy rain, and it leaked again. And then the landlord finally did what he described to me as a partial re-roof. When you think about it, about lots and lots of things, you have parking tickets, and if you don't pay a ticket in 3 days, it costs more. The reason isn't because the city's trying to get more money. It's that you want to give people an incentive to pay on time. And the incentive is that there's a consequence if you pay late. That's why landlords charge late fees on rent. That's why your bank charges you late fees on your mortgage. And I think if you were to ticket landlords and charge them a late fee for not doing work on time, that you would get more landlords doing the work on time being the deadline the city gives, which in most cases is already pretty generous. I was kind of surprised to see the proposal of a $100 fine, because $100 is a really small amount of money. If you make noise, it's a $200 fine. There are many city offenses that have a $300 fine, and I fear that one fine of $100, and then if they still brush you off, you're going to take them to court, will just be an invitation to landlords to pay $100 to buy more time. If the property were vacant, who cares? But since human beings live in the property, and the whole idea of the repairs is to make their living circumstances livable, I think either making the fine higher or having a second fine in a short time period after the first deadline would be good. Again, the goal being not to collect money, the goal being to give a consequence for ignoring the city inspector so that the landlord will actually do the work and the tenant's housing situation will be improved. So I hope you will make a wise decision in this regard, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council? Okay, if there's no one else, Charlie Smythe.
Yeah, well, while we're on the topic of the fines, I did receive a note from Betsy Cronin, which I've emailed to all of you. Just to summarize, she... it is on. It is on. It is not being picked up in the back. Betsy Cronin sent us a note. She's in favor of a fine system, basically that rules without corresponding consequences are worthless. That's the sum total of what she's saying. She supports what we're doing.
Okay, the first thing on the agenda is ordinance number 2007-01-006, an ordinance adopting building and fire safety codes with additions, deletions, and modifications, and repealing certain sections of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Urbana, Illinois, Chapter 5 of the Urbana Code of Ordinances. And we have Libby Tyler and Gordon Skinner.
We just placed on your desk this evening sort of a track record of the last few memos on this, and the most recent completed version of Article 9. So not to create confusion, but wanted you to have everything at your fingertips. So there should be a very short memo from February 7th, which has attached an amendment that was adopted at the last council meeting as an amendment. Then the January 17th memo had 2 pages, 2 sections, that those were approved. And then you'll have the memorandum from Mr. Gitz with his attachment, and that would be the entirety of Article 9 with amendments as presented by staff. And we realize that there will be further changes and suggestions made to that. I don't really have anything to add. I know we did some research on the fines. We did find some models from other communities that we use. This is, to be clear, this is in addition to the penalties that would still apply for the violations. So we don't want to confuse the fines that may be applied administratively for not meeting the compliance deadlines. Still have to make those corrections. And we certainly wouldn't want these smaller administrative fines to get in the way of getting the job done. And, you know, we would not want to create a system where the fines were used, $100 I'll buy a week. No, that week is added on to the penalty. The fines in Mr. Gitz's draft do accelerate. So you can't just blow off that $100. It does accelerate. But certainly the intent is not another opportunity to drag things out. It's just the opposite. It's hopefully going to be an incentive to get things done quicker.
Jim Gitz, did you want to comment at this point? None of them are working, huh? I keep turning mine on. Well,
Well, I'll...
Testing? Can anybody out in the audience hear? No.
I'll do my
Gitz.
best. There's a lot of discussion about the tickets. There's a couple of things that I would like to underscore in addition to the memorandum. The tickets are for failure to comply. That is, you didn't meet the deadline. It is not a substitute for other enforcement. And the tickets are not about the underlying violation. They are, we gave you a certain amount of time and you didn't pay within that time, or you didn't get it done within that time, here's your ticket for failure to comply. That's an important issue because I think that this is looked upon as administrative adjudication. It is not. And here's the reason why. The fine system is to take all of the best wisdom of the council in terms of what you wanted to achieve and to provide an inducement for compliance, an extra tool. And if someone doesn't pay that failure to comply penalty, you don't have the ability to hold them in contempt. You don't have the ability to suspend their driver's license and do things of that nature. The court is really your avenue for enforcement. And it's also the avenue for financial penalties that have the teeth of contempt power behind them. So I'd like you to look at the penalties, the tickets for failure to comply, as an informal dispute resolution mechanism. That is, you give them a ticket because they didn't meet the deadline. If they pay it, it goes away only in the sense of the financial penalty. It doesn't mean that they get a pass to continue the violation, because the ticket is not for the violation. It's for failure to get it done by the deadline. The second thing here is that one of the questions that we were, I think, appropriately asked last Friday was, okay, if we have a really serious issue, what do we do? Do we issue additional tickets? Do we have to wait out the system? And the answer is no. If you look at the prosecution section of this, the Community Development Department still has the ability to give an order for underlying violations and a time frame, and if they feel that it would be useless to issue a ticket for compliance, to go directly to court. Now, earlier today, there was a lot of email discussion about multiple tickets. You know, somebody didn't get it the first time, so let's go back and give them a second ticket. Here's what I'd like you to think about in making that decision. I advise against that, not because I'm against higher penalties or repeat violations or extra tickets, but because I think it's not the way this is set up to function. A second ticket doesn't get you anything. It's more time for people to go through that process and then maybe not comply. I think that the court recourse is the absolute teeth that you have. Why? Because the court has contempt power. The court can put somebody under an order to remedy, and if they don't get it done, they can put people in jail. And you need to also take into account that we're talking about a small number of cases. Most of the time, when there is an order for repair, it gets resolved at the community development level. So we have a few chronic people that we need not bring their names up, but would probably come to mind, whereby the court system becomes the needed recourse. And that part would not change here. So the ticket is an inducement. It's a wake-up call. It's a statement to the person who is charged with getting this work done. If you don't get it done within this time, there are consequences. And when this case goes to court, it's not on the basis of the ticket. It's a lot like our present ordinance prosecution system. That is, someone may be charged by an officer, they get a ticket, and within 14 days it's X amount. But when it's referred to our department for prosecution, it isn't X amount anymore, it's X plus. Why? Because we have court costs, because there is an extra penalty for the fact that you didn't get it resolved then. So that's part of the system would continue to work very much in that same way. We don't just simply prosecute for $100. We prosecute to get any and all remaining violations dealt with, plus what we think is appropriate for the fines. And you will notice that in this draft of amendments, there is specific criteria listed for the legal department to take into account in setting those fines. And they include the level of cooperation, their record of repeat violations, the severity of those violations, et cetera, to make it clear that this is an attempt to make sure that when we do have to use our compliance tools of coercion, that we do so according to an objective criteria. So if there is a desire to perhaps tack something additional onto the ticket system, my recommendation would not be for a second notice, which I think actually is an additional burden and additional time. It would be to perhaps consider that instead of after 7 days, a first violation, goes from $100 to $200, but that if it continues on, that there's a further escalator in that initial ticket. So I hope that helps to underscore and clarify what we've attempted to do here. What I've tried to do is to take all of the ideas and emails, put them together into a framework, organize it in a way that makes some sense, and still be mindful of how we want to use time to resolve issues, not to create a system where there's an incentive or disincentive for compliance.
Okay, Charlie, did you want to say something first, or? Okay, who is first? Danielle, please.
Well, I think there are two issues here. The first is getting the job finished, and the second is getting the job finished on time. And so I think you're correct in saying that the courts, if necessary, are the place to go to make sure the job gets finished. The issue we see time and time again is not necessarily that it doesn't get finished. It sounds like within community development, yeah, after a period of time and a series of citations and proddings, things will get finished. But in the meantime, someone's had to live in their living room, for example, instead of their bedroom. And so the time piece, I almost see it as separate from getting it done. The court system, because of how long it takes, doesn't actually help the tenant in the short run. It does make sure compliance happens, but it doesn't really help the tenant. The tenant needs something done quickly. And so the proposal I see, which are these escalating fines, are really to get a point across in terms of timeliness of things being complete. The second comment is that it's very expensive to go to court, and I think that if we have tools to get people's attention quicker, then we should take those tools, and I think tickets or fines are a way to get that attention. In particular, we see the number of cases going to court as very, very small. And I'm aware of at least one case on Iowa Street. We still haven't taken them to court. I mean, there's multiple situations where, because of our own staff time, we aren't able to get those things in court quickly. And so it's a small number of cases that go to court, but in terms of people, and I'm sure Edwin can speak to this, landlords who don't finish on time, that's probably a very high number of situations, because there's a culture in this community which is going to change with this legislation. And that culture is, it's okay for us to take time to fix things to make sure that tenants get what they need finished. That's actually the cultural shift that's happening here, and there is going to be resistance to that, because simply it hasn't been done in the past. The one thing I would consider, if we're dead set against doing 2 fines, I think the first fine should be $300 or greater. If we're only going to do 1 fine, then it needs to be significant, and it needs to be on the level of seriousness of other fines that we have in the city.
Brandon Bowersox.
I appreciate everybody's time sorting this out. I want to make sure I'm understanding everything right. Certainly, Jim, what you said, I agree with, that we don't want to give people another way to delay maintenance. My first question actually is for you, Gordon and Libby. We already have a second notice system where after the 30 days, if people have not repaired the problem, they get a second notice and a 14-day time period where we say, okay, describe the first and the second and the 30 and the 14.
You might help me. We have modified our notice system quite a bit. Several months ago, we did used to have 3 notices, and unfortunately, some property owners dragged that out. They knew they had 30 days, and then I think it was 21, and some would play that out. So in working with the tenant union, and we met with Charlie at one point, we streamlined those, and also had advice from Mr. Gitz, where we send out, we don't label the notices, it's just a notice. We do still have 30 days for routine violations, and again, we established the 3-tiered level of violations: life safety, livability, routine. Let's say it's routine. They are given 30 days, and that's very standard. 30 days is very universal. If it's life safety, it has to be done sooner. So that's sent out as a as a notice, and we do have the option to go directly to court after that first notice. We say in that first letter, we rewrote all our letters, we say in the first letter, this may be the only notice you receive. Don't expect another notification. Practically, however, a judge will often require a second notice just to demonstrate that the notice was in fact received, that adequate notice was provided. But there may be cases, say with a scofflaw or a repeat offender, where we just really want to skip any second notice, and we're no longer going to a third notice. So we think that we've reduced that play along the timeline. Now the idea with the fines will be to give more of a kickstart if we're getting short compliance initially. But we've pretty much done away with that, 14 days, and all of our records reflect that now. I wanted to respond a little bit to some of the sense that we're not getting compliance with the timelines. We have been doing analysis starting in 2004, and that was the first year that we started we collapsed the time frames repeatedly over the last few years. What I'm describing is the most recent. But we do get high compliance to that 30 days. And it's on the order of, say we had 38 complaints one year. We've tracked the complaints, not all systematic. That might be looked at a little differently. We would have 2 that were not complied within that time frame, and there might be a reason why. Maybe we did have to go to court in that case, or maybe the building was then vacant. And we believe we're going to do 2006 now in our annual report. We believe we'll have a similar, very highly successful record. And we want to just make it even more successful. And of course, we've collapsed the time frame, so we have the 10 days and the 5 days. So we believe we are getting very good compliance, and we will get even quicker compliance. But I can't speak for back in the early 2000s when we did begin to see this pattern of playing out the 3 notices. So we believe we're improving, and we can do statistics to show that.
Okay, so you described that we got rid of the third notice and
Yes.
the third. With the second notice, is there an additional 14 days, and do we tell them that that would put you at such and such a date? That would put you at March 12, or so would you recalculate and add 14 more days and give them some?
Typically, it's another 14 days, and this one we do identify as the final notice.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in that case, it seems to me that we already have a process where they get an original notice, we give them 30 days, and if there isn't compliance, we might send the second notice. You're right, the first one could be the final as well. But if we send the second notice, we would give a 14-day period. And it seems to me that it's not the second ticket that would give people an excuse to delay, but actually sending a second notice without any other accompanying penalties that get, at that point, progressively higher would be an excuse for people to delay. So it seems to me that each time you send a notice, if you send it first and then if you send a second, that each time you send it, the penalty should start very small and affordably and go up so that people see that with each step, now's their chance to comply and to simply fix the leaky roof and call a plumber without a penalty that gets higher. Does it make sense that when you send the second notice, there would also be the ticket that goes along with that notice, just like with the first one?
I think the first notice there would not be a ticket because the clock hasn't started yet. Also, the first notice may very well have 3 different time frames attached to it because of the severity of the violations. But I believe the way this new system would work is the second notice would include, if we do a second notice, and we like not having to necessarily do that, there would be a ticket associated with that. There would be a bill right there with that. Your 30 days is up, and here's $100 or $200, whatever that winds up being. So that's how we would envision that.
Right. That's typically the second notice, if we send it, is a result of some of the work being done.
Right.
And so for some reason they didn't get it all done. And so therefore we'd give them a second one. If somebody doesn't give us anything on the first notice, we probably wouldn't give them a second notice. we could go directly to court.
Okay, so in that case, so say the first notice was January 1st, and you gave until February 1st. That's a 30-day period for a standard sort of repair. And then if they haven't complied on February 1st, you would issue another and saying your new deadline is February 14th. We're giving you 14 more days and that's it. And this second notice would come with a ticket. Shouldn't it be then that at February 14th, that's the time when the progressive discipline goes up and when the penalty gets higher for not meeting the next deadline that we gave?
Actually, the way this is written, after a week, that would go up to $200, so that would
wasn't paid.
escalate. Pardon me?
If it's not paid.
Right, if that ticket wasn't paid.
It's based on payment, but not based on compliance with repairing the property maintenance code violation.
Well, Jim may...
Tickets for the timeline, not the violation.
Okay. I guess...
Unless I'm wrong, Jim, wouldn't the second notice deadline be the second violation? So they would be the $200 for the 14 days, if they did not comply on that. So they'd have to pay the first fine, and then after 14 days, they'd have the second fine.
That's the table.
That's the table in there.
9,
Okay.
Roman numeral 9-5, there's a table of acceleration.
So that would be another failure to comply ticket.
Right.
Now, one for the second offense at the second offense dollar amount.
Right.
Okay. So I think my
Isn't that how you read it?
basic desire is to see that each time as we give a future deadline, we give people a little more time to repair, that if they don't meet that deadline that we give, that the level of fine go up. I think that's only sensible in terms of someone as a landlord thinking, okay, when do I have to get this done and what are my penalties? They have to see that the city is responding and that each time there's some fine associated with noncompliance. Thank you. Yeah.
And there is the request for extension, though, and we do have those for some specialty work that is not life safety or livability, waiting for the weather to improve for re-roofing or not being able to get the particular contractor. And it needs to be, I think there's improved language, too, about what is just cause for an extension. And we do have requests for that.
Definitely.
Okay, Lynn, did you have a question or comment?
Yes. I guess, when we talked about this before, I was supportive of it, that it move out of committee and go on to council. But since then, I got a lot of feedback from folks that are landlords. And a couple of concerns that I have, I think first of all, I think this item number 5, where the code official may extend above the timelines for good cause shown, I think that's very important. But what worries me about this whole process is that we probably have, I'll just use the 80-20 rule. 20% of landlords that aren't very good, and 80% of landlords that want to do a good job and want to provide safe housing for the people that they rent to. And I worry that this new ordinance, with all the fining, you know what? The landlords that don't do a good job probably won't pay their fines anyway. We're going to be chasing them around to get them to even pay the fine. The good landlords, I'm afraid, will look at this and look at the document and look at our new rules and go, whoa, kind of another thing to worry about in Urbana. And so it just worries me, and I've gotten feedback to that end that I don't want this to be a barrier to the good landlords and be an administrative nightmare for us trying to chase money down from the bad landlords, the landlords that don't care, and that we're chasing now, we can't even get them to court. You can't sometimes find them, let alone get money out of them. And I'm just not sure that this is really going to fix our problem. And I think that our rental registration process is a good thing. Very supportive of it, and I think that's a step that we've taken to make Urbana apartments more livable and appropriate for the people that live in Urbana in them. Let's see how that goes. Let's give that its due, and then see what we need to do if there's further improvements that we need to make. But I kind of think we've got the tools at our disposal now, to get the job done. I'm not saying maybe 5 years ago we weren't as aggressive as we should have been or could have been, and now I can hear that over the last couple of years, we've been more aggressive. And we've already made changes just among the way our staff does business to get things done more quickly. So I see that as a positive, and I would encourage us to use the tools that we've got. So I just am being open about this, saying, you know, I thought this was a good idea when we talked about it, but since have gotten more feedback from constituents and others who own apartments in Urbana. So I just wanted to share my concerns.
I think Dennis Roberts was next, and then Heather.
Do you want to take your turn, Charlie, first?
Go ahead, Dennis. I want to make a motion to get this going.
Okay. When a violation is cited by the inspector and the request for compliance is made, do you automatically set up at a time that you return? If the first violation for not meeting the repair takes place, is it 14 days thereafter? Does that mean that the inspector has returned to check it with it before or at the 14-day time? Do you have a schedule that you actually return promptly at a certain time because of the initial violation time?
On the lower amount of days, the 1 or 2 days or 3 days, we do tell them when we're coming back. But on the longer ones, they may be able to get it done before the 14 days, so we expect them to call and make an appointment. So we don't do the 30 days in advance. We hope they do it sooner and therefore call us and tell us they're done.
It might have been done, but they may not call you. I'm sure that happens, right?
That happens, yes.
And so how do you find out whether it's been done or not? You then
on that
schedule
date,
a return.
Then we do contact them.
All right. Then at that time, and if you find that it has not been done, do you automatically then cite them? That's the process that's going to happen now, right? After the 14 days, and you've returned and nothing's been done, they're going to be cited. Is that correct?
That's the way I understand it. Yes.
Right. Now, Jim, I think there was this comment that the inspector has a. Am I getting this right? That there's a prerogative that they have on the amount that they cite them, depending upon the history of the landlord in the past? Well, what was that statement that you just made earlier in your conversation about there being discretion
They have
for the amounts?
They have the discretion as to whether to go directly to court after a notice to repair has been issued, or to levy a fine. The fine is according to the schedule that is set in here.
So it's not the fine that's under discretion.
Correct. I mean, it is. They can't just choose a range of fines.
Right.
So in court, we can. In court, the state statute limit is $750, and each day can be a continuing violation. But the schedule of fines, both what happens initially for subsequent violations and also what happens after 7 days, is set out in the proposed amendment.
So there's a potential that in a recurring situation, or a landlord who's had a bad history, that the fine thing may not even be put into place, but there might be a court action taken by the city?
Yes, and I think that that's really an important aspect of this, because people say, well, we don't want to go to court. Well, if someone is intentionally flaunting this and they don't want to comply, the mere issuance of a ticket, they probably won't pay attention to it either. And if they don't want to comply and they don't want to pay the ticket, you don't have any means, like you do with parking tickets, to take sanction against them. Because this is an administrative adjudication. This is an informal dispute mechanism. You can issue the ticket, but ultimately when they ignore it, your tool of enforcement is to file that complaint in court like we do for hundreds of other violations of ordinances on a regular basis. And there seems to be this statement that we don't enforce ordinances. Nonsense. Come up there and look at the number of things that we file, including the cases that have just been filed in the last week on these issues. I mean, yes, the court system takes time, but the point is that that is the only tool you absolutely have which has the power of contempt attached to it to force compliance. And in one case that I think some of you are familiar with, when we didn't get the repairs made in that property, We brought a rule to show cause why this person shouldn't be held in contempt, and the judge sorted it out and said, you will implement these changes. And what I want to stress is that ultimate power of contempt is still important, because that's the only thing that we have. We don't have it attached to the tickets that has the power to put people in jail in an extreme situation. But the significance of the ticket system here is to follow through with what the council wanted to do, which was an inducement. And you will also notice that unlike the present system, in a lot of these codes, they are, from 0 to 30 days. Well, I've taken the language on deadlines and formulated it into 3 categories: eminent health, life, safety violations, which is one set of deadlines; livability issues, which is a second set of deadlines; and routine violations, I guess you'd call them for lack of a better term, which is up to 30 days. And then you will also notice that there is a provision in there that for good cause shown, you can extend the deadline. And the reason for that language in there is to make it clear that extensions are not something granted as a ordinary course of business. They're attached for, I called every plumber and I can't get it done. I need to order a furnace and it needs a special part. There's good cause shown so that there is a way to deal with situations that require some sense of judgment in it. So that's the kind of mixing and matching that has been done to build in deadlines, to build in compliance methods, and to build in a ticket system, which I think can be effective as an inducement, and I think that most people probably will pay those tickets. But I want to focus on the extreme situation, which people have brought up, which is what do we do if this doesn't get compliance? And I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Charlie Smythe.
Okay, I know that staff and Gordon in particular are anxious to get the property maintenance code underway. They've made a huge effort to have this ready in time for this construction season, and getting this whole thing to us and getting it done and reviewed has been a major effort, along with rental registration and the property or the plan unit development stuff that's coming later in committee. They've been kept very, very busy. I'm hoping that we can take a couple of minor tweaks tonight to this and get it out and pass it out of here. I'd like to thank staff for the lot of work that's gone into this and to all the suggestions we've had from both private and public. Jim, now do I understand it that what you've sent us and what's sitting on our desk includes all these past amendments but has strikeouts where you want to make changes, right? Okay. In that case, I'd like to move ordinance number 2007-01-006, an ordinance adopting building and fire safety codes with additions, deletions, and modifications, and repealing certain sections of the Code of Ordinances, City of Urbana, Illinois, Chapter 5 of the Urbana Code of Ordinances, as given to us and sitting on our desk from Jim. This version right here.
Okay, there's a motion.
All the other previous articles that haven't changed.
Plus, yeah, right. It's all the whole package. That's why I read the whole motion here, plus this thing right here. So now, if I could speak to this, I think that the whole property maintenance code is the 2003 standards and so on. So what we're talking about in particular is a very small piece of this much greater whole. The piece that we're talking about, though, is really a codification of what staff is currently doing by policy. The 30-day with timings in there is what they're doing by policy. Okay, so that is currently underway, and I thought it was important to include that in. Originally, it was thought that it should be included in the rental registration, but instead, Jim thought it was better in the property maintenance code because it really is related to property maintenance code. And I think that's a good idea. What is a little different is the issuance of a ticket at the end of the time period. So that's the one different item that I think that Lynn is referring to. In terms of the schedule, that's already there in policy. So let's focus it, whether or not they should get a ticket. Okay, so I think they should. I think you have to have some consequences. We're trying to get some meat in this to get it going. It's not going to affect the majority of landlords because they get the stuff done on time already. So I think it's an additional inducement, and we should just support it. So I have a couple of very small amendments that I sent in email, plus a change in one that. So I think if you can just follow along. I've run some of this by Jim, and I think, all of it's been by Jim, and I think he he can jump in where I've missed up. Okay, so in section PM 104.6.1, which has been renumbered in 1A, which currently says defective or non-functioning plumbing or electrical wiring, I'd like to change that as per my email, which I think everybody has gotten, to read A, defective, dangerous, or non-functioning plumbing, electrical, gas, or other necessary utility. Okay, that's the first change. I'm going to put together three little ones here. For under E, in that same section, serious structural problems or conditions which render a property uninhabitable. And then in section 2, under leaking roof, I would change that to leaking roof that poses a safety or health risk. Okay, those are three small changes that I would move as an amendment.
Okay,
I have two more. I have one more amendment, but
shall
I'll
we
make
just
that separate.
do
I
these
do want to do them
separately,
separately, yeah.
so we won't get too
Yeah.
confused here?
So let me ask you a question. May I?
Okay, we have an amendment. First, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Bowersox. Then we have an amendment that was just proposed by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Bowersox. Now we have a question from Dennis Roberts.
All right, so, Charlie, what you did is you basically, in your second amendment, which is Section E, and it has to do with the serious structural problems, what you did is you changed the wording of that based on Jim Gitz's comments concerning overall deterioration as being an unuseful terminology.
Right, yeah. So I asked him what's the best way to include some of those concepts in a proper legal wording that cover that, and that was his response to that, yes.
Okay,
so I dropped
conditions
my other reference to that, exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Danielle Chenoweth.
2 questions. Could you repeat the second bullet point in that? Because I was working off your email and there was a change, so.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. So the second one is under E, where I was talking about serious structural problems. Jim suggests the language that it be E, serious structural problems or conditions which render a property uninhabitable.
Okay. And then the second is a question under leaking roof. Leaking roof that poses a safety or health risk. It seems like that's perhaps watering down leaky roof. Leaky roof will always pose a safety threat, especially as we've seen with mold and other things in the future. It seems like any time a roof is leaking, there needs to be immediate. So I'm just concerned. I want to understand the logic of that piece.
Well, in terms of roofing is something that has to be done carefully and properly. It may be tricky to get it done within 5 days. Okay? So if something is, if you've got a serious leak, I'm trying to distinguish between a serious leak that does pose an immediate safety risk. Say it's dripping on your electrical stuff, for example. Okay, then it poses an immediate risk. So I'm trying to distinguish between what you'd have to get done within 5 days in that section or what you'd have 30 days, as you normally would for most other things. So that's why I'm trying to make that's why I just thought it'd be more appropriate to insert a little, to add a little bit of verbiage there so that staff would know to distinguish between something that needs to be dealt with basically within 5 days, immediately to 5 days, or could be given 30 days notice.
And I guess I just want to hear staff comment and perhaps the tenant union's comment on that particular piece.
Esther did like the additional language, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Well, I think that helps it sell it, because
Okay.
there are some things in leaking roofs that might take a little longer, that might not pose a real risk to the people who are living there, if it's, depending on where it is in the building.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, the amendment passes. Did you have another amendment, Mr.
This
Smith?
second one's pretty straightforward here. Jim suggested putting burned out or inoperable lights in hallways, stairwells, or entryways or common areas in the 1 to 3 day category. But that took out parking areas or basements, and which is what we had in the second section, which was in the 1 to 5 day category. And I would prefer to leave it in the 1 to 5 day category with the parking areas and basements left in there. Clearly, if it's a dark and a dangerous situation, this gives staff 1 to 5, they've got a 1 to 5 day period to play with. If it's dangerously dark or something, they can require that it be done within 1 or 2 days. If it's on the other end, it provides a little more time. I'm just trying to provide more flexibility to the landlord or the maintenance staff on this one. So I think I'd prefer to basically strike 1D as it's currently written and leave in 2G, which is struck out. So I'd move that change.
Well, actually, that was my suggestion.
Oh, well, sorry. Well, I guess I don't.
thought that not having any lights could be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, well, but you see, you've got 1 to 3 days in the first category and 1 to 5 days in the second category, and you cut out parking areas and basements. To me, a dark stairwell into a basement would be the most dangerous situation for me personally, because I'm a klutz.
Where is this?
Okay.
Or basements? Oh, you're just doing...
2G, as it's struck out, to me is a better wording and includes more stuff than what came out in 1D.
So it's up to the inspector to decide the level of danger of this condition, right? And decide how many days. So you could say it needs to be fixed today, or you could say it needs to be fixed in 5 days.
Yes, I think
Okay.
I probably won't get it right every time.
Okay. All right.
So does that make sense?
So you have a motion by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Bowersox, is that correct? Okay, you want to comment on that,
Yeah,
Brandon?
I have a quick question. I just want to make sure, Jim, that that's okay with you two, that leaving burned out lights, those two different categories of it, makes sense, and that you've seen that wording or are okay with it.
I haven't personally looked over the wording. I remember reading it in the original memo. We were trying to sort out issues that seemed to go together, and I don't think there's anything in this amendment that should cause distress.
And then Heather had her.
You want to say something? On this amendment? Okay, okay. Any other discussion on this amendment? All right, would all those in favor please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Those opposed? That amendment carries. Now, did you want to say something, Heather?
Since Charlie went ahead and made this motion before I was able to speak, I'd just like to give voice to the landlords that I have personally spoken with, and that is, what I've heard is a lot like what Lynn heard. We have property maintenance code, we have rental registration, and now we have this ticket system, and it's really a disincentive to the more than 80% of people that are good landlords, because I've heard from several landlords when the rental registration came about, they're selling their property and they're out. And so what I'm giving a voice to is the voice that we need to give the more than 80% of good landlords a carrot, and by ticketing people, I think it needs to go to that. I think that with the rental registration and the property maintenance code that we already have, this is just another step that the good landlords have to pay for the bad landlords' mistakes, and I think it's going to end up making the city of Urbana look like we're not favoring the good landlords, and that there's a lot of people who are going to say, I'm selling my property and I'm out. And I've heard that from more than 10 landlords. So I'm giving a voice to the more than 10 landlords that I've heard from.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this ordinance. Mr. Bowersox.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of pose a question to the group and to Charlie in particular, who had this other amendment about the issue of the second ticket. Do you feel like after our questions you understand the process and you're choosing not to make that amendment? Can you explain why and how you see it working at this stage?
I guess I'd like to start it out in increments and give the mechanism as proposed a chance to function. In 18 months, it comes back. It is a new thing that we're adding, and what I'd like to point out is that the Property Maintenance Code is new in that it's the 2003 revisions. So this is a very large document that we're working with. This is a very small part, and I'd like to emphasize that staff has already been working with the schedule that's in this setup. There already is a fine system that's associated with this procedure, and this just spells it out in much clearer terms than we currently have. I think, frankly, if I were a landlord, this spells it out and I can see exactly what's going on. For the majority of landlords, it's not going to make any difference in the way they do business because they already get these things done in these kinds of time frames. Okay? What this does is it deals with that handful of landlords that drag us through the system over and over and over again and cause problems in the neighborhood. You know, this is very popular in my part of the community. You know, I've gotten positive feedback from two landlords in favor of this. They get their work done quickly and they keep their properties up. Okay, they have no problem with this. And so I don't see why codifying and making clear what our procedures are in a nice, you know, in a very straightforward legal mechanism would cause upset. What I can see is that if misinformation is out there and people don't understand the system, and it's funny that you see a number of people from Champaign complaining about this who haven't been part of the process. They clearly haven't read through this and haven't seen it. This just spells out what our day-to-day practices are, and so and it's a small piece of the entire property maintenance code. So I fully support it here. Now, in terms of what the fine level should be, the ticketing system, maybe we start at 100 and just get it started, get it going. In 18 months, if it doesn't work, we can come back and review it.
Mr. Bowersox.
Okay, and just to make sure I fully understand, then we will vote, if the next thing we do is take a vote on the version with the failure to comply tickets system that Jim created, and without the second failure to comply ticket, because we don't need a second ticket, there will be the second offense, third offense, and fourth offense system. So it's Jim's wording without Charlie's amendment, right? Correct.
Dennis Roberts.
Okay. And I guess maybe I want to understand that the fine system that is indicated on page 9.5, at the top of the page is a list of the offenses, including a second offense at $200, a third offense at $300, and a fourth offense at $400. And you're saying that those are appropriate, even though often after the first ticketing, the city would take a landlord to court who's been a problem. So is it true that these offense tickets, not tickets, but these fines that are for the second, third, and fourth offense are on a single property, the same offense being unattended to, and that in actuality these are fines which would be threatened against landlords who don't really have such a bad track record, but we're just going to tell them that we are serious about this? Because if they were landlords who didn't have a serious bad track record, we wouldn't even have these fines, we would go to court? I guess what I'm trying to find out is what is the value of having a third, fourth, and a second, third, and fourth offense rate? And is it excessive? I guess is what my question is.
The issue of whether it's excessive is a policy decision. That's up to the council to decide. There's no magic to this, but this schedule of fines was discussed with Dr. Tyler and seemed to make sense in terms of other kinds of violations that the city has. But there's no magic to it, and some people could argue for a lower fine and others for a higher fine. I'm not here to advocate a particular fine system. It's just what we worked out and seemed to make sense in light of other situations that were similar. In regard to your other question, which is why to have escalating fines, is to, I think, give some sense of accountability for violations that are that they don't just disappear. We don't start from ground zero on a second and subsequent offense. That seemed to be the message that I got from reading the different emails of the council on this, so I incorporated that. And that's consistent with our philosophy that we've used in our ordinance violations. If, you know, I hate to keep analogizing to NTAs, but when an officer gives a notice to appear, and it's a noise violation, if the records show that there's been other violations by that person, and they also have a prior criminal history, you know, they don't get the same violation as somebody who has never had any problems. So this hopefully gives the city the ability to say, here's the schedule, and I think that these notices that are served on people will be important, the wording that is chosen, and to indicate that we are serious about what we're doing without the first violation, in this case, being so onerous and so draconian that it doesn't seem fair.
Okay, I accept that because I think that's a significant way to begin. It's certainly softer than harder. Thank you.
Lynn Barnes.
Just one more, second time. You know, I think about this in terms of getting tickets, and of course, we don't have relationships like with the parking meter men and women. They just put a ticket on our window and we pay it, and we kind of grunt around about it. But you know, our city officials, our code officials, have relationships, I think, with all of our landlords. I hope they do. And because, you know, when you're going to build an apartment or you're going to do something new, you want to get tight with the city officials, and you want to know what are the expectations and how can I work most effectively in your community. And I think this ticket system hurts that relationship. I think it puts our officials in kind of a sometimes probably a quandary, because even though in that one section 5, I think it is, where it says we have some leniency, you know, like if you're close, or, you know, and maybe we'll let you get by on this one, then they're in the position where, okay, well, I let this guy get by on it by 2 days, somebody else by, you know, 1 day, and you know, and then I think you set yourself up for, you know, not as positive relationships between landlords and city officials. So that's my other concern I wanted to share.
Danielle Chenoweth.
I'm supportive of moving forward with what is and kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude. I do think $100 based on our schedule of fines that I've seen elsewise is ridiculously low. It's one of the lowest fines we have. I do want, in 18 months, when we take a look at the rental registration program, some of the information Libby and Gordon, you brought tonight in terms of this is how many people haven't complied. That's really new information. That's in this whole conversation. We haven't necessarily looked at those statistics, and that seems to be things that we would take into consideration when we look at this in 18 months. Is, you know, how many people have been cited, how many people are in compliance, you know, what kinds of trends there are in terms of this. So I think that's useful. Interestingly, in the context of this conversation, perhaps we should revisit some of our other ordinances, like the ordinance that says you have to cut your grass once it's 8 inches or above. I have at least one constituent, if we think this is draconian, who has a lien on their house right now because they didn't mow a corner of their lawn, and Lynn has another constituent who has a lien on his house because he was trying to do some prairie plantings in front and neighbors didn't like it, and so he has a lien on his house because he's contesting that with the city. So when we look at liens on your house for not having your grass cut and, you know, being in dispute versus landlords putting people's health and safety at risk because they aren't fixing things in a timely manner, I think that it's hard to even make that comparison. So I feel like the culture in this town is going to change, and housing is one of our most important assets, and this is exactly the right time for us to do a rental registration program, to do these code violation upgrades, et cetera, because it's our housing stock that's really one of our most important assets. We don't have mountains. We do have cross-country skiing on days like today, but it's really our housing and our neighborhoods that are so important. And so I think that Urbana is taking a huge and very important step forward in really kind of raising the bar and making sure that the culture in this town is one of health and safety, and making sure that our housing stock stays in good working order.
I think that maybe, was it Heather next or Dennis Roberts next?
I let Heather speak.
I don't have a problem with the fines. What I have a problem with is the tickets. I think the ticketing system, like Lynn stated, just makes it hard to have a relationship with the good landlords, and I think the fines cover the health and safety issues already, and so for the ticketing system, I don't believe the ticketing system is really going to change this health and safety, life and safety issues. So again, my issue is not with the fines, it's with the ticketing system.
Okay, Dennis Roberts, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and this will be quick. All right. I mean, basically, this is like a really huge code ordinance, and we are kind of scrabbling over just the very smallest part. And I guess if there are landlords who are going to find that this is so onerous that they're going to sell the property, I don't think it's going to make the property not a rental unit. It's going to be sold to somebody else who will become a landlord, operating a 10-plex or 20-plex or whatever it is, whatever the rental property actually is, it'll remain a rental property. And hopefully, whoever is trading their properties and moving on for whatever reasons, hopefully that whoever then purchases into the plan of the city will do so in an honorable and in a just manner, and realize that the codes that we're adopting are meant to be for the best benefit of all. And there is a process we were setting up that we all choose to review the codes in general, and the process of the property maintenance is it 18 months? I understand. I guess it's a fair run. I'm not totally sold on every aspect of this, but I think overall it's a workable and possibly useful tool, so I'm going to support it.
I think Robert Lewis wants to say something.
Well, since everybody's been a couple times around, I just said nothing. I think I should say something. I think change is something that all of us kind of despise from time to time. But there's nothing in this system now that shouldn't be. And as far as I'm concerned, there's probably more that should be in terms of maintenance of your property and how it should be. If we take too big of a bite, people would really complain. But I think change comes with, it's time for a change, and we need to make that change now. And we've got 18 months to come up with some analysis for what we want to look at for people dealing with these changes. And if there's necessary changes we make down the road, that's cool too. But for now, I think we need to take a big bite, move forward, and see how people respond. Perceptions are, everybody has them, so.
Okay. Charlie Smythe.
I'm not going to speak to, I'm going to make sure people understand. The 18-month review is part of the rental registration thing, but I think that since this piece came out of that I think council's basically requesting that this, maybe there are other sections here that need to be included in that 18-month review. So we'd appreciate that this be included in there. I don't know that we need to necessarily make a motion, do we, to ask that be done, or should we make an amendment that
maybe we ought to make it official?
What we could do is vote on the ordinance and then make a motion about that.
Sure. Would that be okay, Jim?
Yeah. Well, you can do it two ways. You can do it formally or informally. Informally, if you say that we are interpreting this as a part of the rental registration package, I think that's sufficient. If you also want to insert a separate section in the ordinance provisions that are adopted saying that you want a review of this in 18 months, you can do that as well.
I'll just make an informal motion after this vote then.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on this ordinance. The motion is by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Bowersox. It has two amendments that were approved. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
No.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
No.
Okay, the ordinance is approved. Did you want to make a motion, Mr. Smythe?
I'd informally request that staff include the property maintenance code and relevant sections as part of the review of the rental registration.
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you all very much. Jim Gitz and Libby and Gordon for all your work on this. And Charlie for all your work on this. And Esther Pat for all your work. Thanks. Okay, next is appointment of our Human Relations Officer. I'm recommending the appointment of Todd Rent. I think you have his resume. He works with the University of Iowa Hospitals right now. I think he's highly qualified. Is there a motion on that?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Ms. Barnes. Is there any discussion?
When does he get to town, or?
I think he's starting early March.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.